After the catastrophic defeat of the German Sixth Army at Stalingrad, the Soviet juggernaut awakened, ready to crush the Germans and push them back to the gates of Berlin. In early 1943, the fate of Germany and the entire war hinged on Operation Barbarossa. They had to stop the Soviet advance at any cost. Field Marshal von Manstein, renowned for his strategic brilliance, orchestrated a counteroffensive so daring it could turn the tide of the war. Both forces braced for a monumental clash as Dzerzhinsky Square in the vital Soviet city of Kharkov erupted in flames and smoke, becoming a battlefield for the third time since 1941. Under von Manstein's command, the elite Waffen SS Panzer Corps achieved the impossible by besieging the city. Simultaneously, Panzer Grenadiers stormed the urban landscape, breaching bunkers, homesteads and apartments, engaging Soviet defenders in merciless house-to-house combat. Among the desperate Soviet defenders was Yang Kyongjong, one of the unluckiest soldiers of World War II, a Korean man who had fought for the Japanese, Germans and Soviets. With no knowledge of Russian or German, he faced the vengeful might of the Third Reich. As grenades exploded and relentless machine gun fire rained down, Kyongjong realized that, despite all the horrors he had witnessed in his ill-fated career, the Third Battle of Kharkov was the most brutal and ruthless encounter he had ever endured. Surviving it would be an ordeal. Young Kyongjong's story begins in 1938. As he turned 18, he was living in Manchuria, which had been occupied by Japan since 1931. With the onset of World War II, he was conscripted by the Imperial Japanese Army into the prestigious Kwantung Division to fight against the Soviet Union. The Kwantung Division was Japan's largest and most esteemed force. Kyongjong served the Imperial Japanese Army until the Battle of Khalkhin Gol, also known as the Nomonan Incident, a significant conflict between the Soviet Union and Japan that raged from May to September 1939 near the Khalkhin Gol River in Mongolia. This intense struggle involved over 100,000 troops and 1,000 tanks and aircraft, resulting in a staggering 30,000 to 50,000 casualties. On August 31st, 1939, in the final climactic battle, the Japanese were decisively crushed. Kyongjong could barely see through the thick, acrid smoke from his trench. A bitter blend of burning fuel and gunpowder, his uniform soaked with sweat and grime was now stiff and reeking of the battlefield. Suddenly, through the haze, Kyongjong saw enemy soldiers advancing. His heart pounded as he clutched his rifle tighter, the wood and metal slick with sweat. Bullets whizzed past, some striking the ground near him, others ricocheting off rocks with a high-pitched whine. In moments, the Japanese regiment was overwhelmed and surrounded. Confused and defeated, Kyongjong raised his hands as he and his comrades were captured. Falling into Soviet hands, Kyongjong was sent off to a labor camp. However, due to the massive shortage of manpower as the conflict grew increasingly more lethal, the USSR conscripted whoever they could into military service. This forced Kyongjong into the Red Army, where he was thrust into the desperate and violent Soviet defense against Germany's Operation Barbarossa. During the summer of 1941, Operation Barbarossa unfolded as a massive military operation with over 4 million Axis troops marching across Soviet territory. Using the Blitzkrieg doctrine, they succeeded in annihilating entire Soviet units and delivering devastating blows to the Red Army. One of the key flashpoints of this operation was the Battle of Kharkov, which took place in October 1941. The German Sixth Army, part of Army Group South, aimed to capture the city of Kharkov, Ukraine, from the Soviet 38th Army. As the fighting erupted, a fierce struggle ensued. Amidst the chaos of battle, Soviet personnel demonstrated remarkable resilience and strategic thinking. They initiated a meticulous plan to dismantle the city's factories and relocate them farther east, away from the destructive reach of German bombings. This mission was crucial as Kharkov was a vital industrial hub, producing essential war material for the Soviet Union. The combat raged on for 4 grueling days, leaving the city in ruins and the population on the brink of starvation. Ultimately, the Germans emerged victorious, but the Soviets managed to accomplish their primary objective, evacuating or destroying essential factory equipment before withdrawing from the city. The significance of Kharkov cannot be overstated. Its strategic location, with airline and railroad connections, made it a pivotal control point for vast regions such as Ukraine, the Crimean Peninsula, the Donbass, the Dnieper, and the Caucasus. Control over Kharkov would profoundly impact the course of the war on the Eastern Front. The aftermath of the battle left a trail of destruction, with Kharkov reduced to a desolate wasteland. The city's inhabitants faced unspeakable suffering, enduring starvation, disease, and the constant threat of violence. Author Alexei Nikolaevich Tolstoy, upon witnessing the devastation, remarked that Kharkov resembled Rome in the 5th century, a huge cemetery. The scars of the Battle of Kharkov were exacerbated a few months later. In May 1942, the Red Army launched a major offensive to retake the city. The ensuing clash, known as the Second Battle of Kharkov, was one of the largest and bloodiest battles of the war. Over 350,000 Axis forces, led by Fedor von Bock and Ewald von Kleist, clashed with more than 750,000 Soviet troops in a titanic struggle along the Donets River. The fighting was intense, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. Despite their numerical superiority, the Soviets lost over 280,000 men, while the Axis lost an estimated 20,000. Operation Frederikus, launched by the Germans to counter the Soviet advance, ultimately proved successful, pushing the Red Army back and consolidating German control over the region. In the aftermath of the disastrous defeat at Stalingrad, the Red Army leadership, despite setbacks, remained steadfast in their determination to liberate Kharkov from Axis occupation. The year 1943 marked a significant turning point on the Eastern Front as the tide began to shift in favor of the Soviets. The Wehrmacht, reeling from the crushing defeat at Stalingrad, found itself in a precarious position. The encirclement and subsequent surrender of General Paulus's 6th Army had irrevocably weakened the German forces, leaving them vulnerable to a Soviet counteroffensive. In anticipation of a renewed offensive, the Soviet Stavka under Marshal Georgy Zhukov meticulously planned Operation Star. The aim was to liberate the key cities of Kursk, Kharkov, and Belgorod, which had been under Axis control for an extended period. The execution of Operation Star was nothing short of ambitious. 4 powerful Red Army tank corps, commanded by Lieutenant General Markian Popov, spearheaded the assault, breaching the heavily fortified German defenses along the Donets River. With precise coordination, the tank corps launched a daring attack from the rear, striking deep into the Axis front. Simultaneously, 2 additional tank corps converged on the city of Zaporizhia, situated near the Dnieper River. Their objective was to storm the headquarters of Army Group South, the primary command responsible for the region's defense. Faced with the relentless Soviet onslaught, the German forces were compelled to retreat from Kharkov, regrouping to contain the rapidly advancing Red Army. However, the Soviets, emboldened by their initial successes, continued their offensive with unwavering determination. A day after recapturing Kharkov, they amassed even greater forces to press forward with their advance. Word of the Soviet advance reached the highest echelons of the German command. Enraged by the setback, Adolf Hitler personally flew to the headquarters of Field Marshal Erich von Manstein to express his vehement disapproval of the retreat. In a heated exchange, Hitler demanded an immediate counterattack to reverse the Soviet gains. Manstein, a seasoned military commander known for his strategic acumen, approached the situation with a measured and calculated response. Recognizing the folly of launching a frontal assault against the numerically superior Soviet forces, he proposed a bold and daring counteroffensive. Manstein's plan involved targeting the overextended Red Army flank with 5 Panzer Corps, effectively encircling and cutting off the Soviet supply lines. The ultimate goal was to recapture Kharkov and restore the German defensive positions. Impressed by Manstein's strategic thinking, Hitler reluctantly agreed to grant him the freedom to execute his plan. The stakes were high, as the advancing Soviet forces now threatened to overrun the critical airfield where Luftflotte 4, a vital component of the German Air Force, was stationed. As Manstein meticulously planned the counterattack, the Soviet 60th and 13th Armies continued their relentless push, forcing the 4th Panzer Division to withdraw from Kursk. This maneuver created a significant breach in the German defenses, spanning approximately 40 miles, and leaving the German forces in the region dangerously exposed. In the ensuing days, the German resistance stiffened, and the Soviet advances began to encounter increasing resistance. However, the damage had already been done. The Soviets had successfully breached the German front and posed a grave threat to several German units. Recognizing the urgency of the situation, Manstein knew he had to act swiftly and decisively. The Führer unleashed several panzer and motorized divisions to fortify the counteroffensive, deploying over 130,000 Axis troops against a massive force of more than 300,000 Soviet soldiers. Despite being heavily outnumbered, the Germans relied on their strategic prowess. Manstein's plan unfolded in 3 relentless phases. First, the obliteration of Soviet spearheads. Second, the recapture of Kharkov. And third, a decisive strike against Soviet forces entrenched at Kursk. This brutal campaign was known to the Germans as the Donets campaign. On February 19th, Hauss's Waffen SS Panzer Corps launched a ferocious assault on enemy forces south of Zaporizhia, creating a diversion for the 4th Panzer Army's impending attack. Simultaneously, the 1st Panzer Army surged northward, intent on annihilating a column of Soviet tanks. The initial clashes caught the Red Army Tank Corps completely off guard. The Germans' momentum proved unstoppable. After 3 days of relentless combat across the front line, the Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler flanked the 6th Soviet Army and secured the vital Dnieper River. The Waffen SS tankers, with ruthless precision, encircled, pinned down, and obliterated multiple Red Army vehicle units scattered near the Samara River. Meanwhile, the Das Reich and Totenkopf divisions advanced through the northeast with crushing force, dismantling the fragile supply networks of the Soviet spearheads. By February 24th, the Soviet advance was decisively halted, forcing Stalin's troops onto the defensive. The battlefield was littered with the wreckage of tanks and the echoes of a shattered offensive. In the tumultuous last week of February, the frigid plains south of Kharkov witnessed a titanic clash between the Soviet 3rd Tank Army and the well-entrenched Axis forces. The advancing Soviet infantry, supported by the relentless efforts of the Leibstandarte and Totenkopf divisions, faced an onslaught designed to repel the Red Army's armored juggernaut. Initial gains by the Soviet Central Front against the imposing 2nd Panzer Army seemed promising, but their offensive momentum rapidly dissipated. On March 3rd, in a desperate attempt to break the encirclement of the beleaguered Soviet 6th Army, the Stavka launched a daring task force. However, as the Red Army's vehicles and infantry columns surged forward, they were mercilessly stalked and obliterated by the piercing screeches and lethal precision of the dreaded Ju-87 Stuka dive bombers. The Soviet relief effort quickly turned catastrophic. The 15th Tank Corps found itself surrounded by the iron grip of the Totenkopf division, which executed a flawless flank maneuver, trapping the Soviet armor in a vise. Meanwhile, the 12th Tank Corps, after a brutal engagement with the elite Das Reich division, was forced onto the defensive, reeling from the onslaught of Germany's best. As the battle raged on, the Luftwaffe maintained air superiority, relentlessly pounding the Soviet forces from above. The piercing screams of the Stukas reverberated through the icy air, sending shivers down the spines of the Soviet troops. The once promising offensive had now devolved into a desperate struggle for survival. Following the blistering German victories, the Soviet 3rd Tank Army lay in ruins, its forces decimated and forced into retreat. By March 5th, the Soviet 6th Army, along with numerous tank units, was annihilated by the combined might of the German ground forces and Luftflotte 4, commanded by Field Marshal Wolfram von Richthofen. The air raids were relentless, with the Luftwaffe executing over 1,000 sorties, delivering devastating close air support to the advancing tank divisions. The aftermath of this counterattack was staggering. The once sizable Soviet forces were reduced to smoldering wreckage and shattered lines. By March 7th, the Soviet defenders of Kharkov were in a dire situation as the Germans prepared for a decisive thrust. Field Marshal von Manstein's panzer divisions began pressing toward Kharkov from the west, aiming to encircle the city from the north. Despite the best efforts of the Soviet Tank Corps and mechanized infantry to stop the Axis forces, their efforts were futile. The German forces, including the two SS Panzer Corps, had encircled significant Soviet units, effectively isolating them. The Soviet troops, made up of various rifle divisions and tank brigades, began a desperate withdrawal into Kharkov under intense German pressure. The SS Panzer Corps launched their assault on Kharkov from multiple directions, determined to encircle the city and prevent any reinforcements from arriving. Under the leadership of General Belov, the Soviets mounted a staunch defense, especially during the fierce street fighting that erupted on March 12th. Kharkov's urban landscape provided numerous defensive advantages for the Soviets. The defenders utilized the city's buildings, streets, and alleys to set up ambushes and strongpoints. Snipers perched on rooftops targeted German troops, inflicting significant casualties and slowing the German advance. In the midst of the fierce battle for Kharkov, a solitary figure stood out, Yang Kyung-jong, a man fighting for a cause that was not his own. Hailing from a distant land, Kyung-jong found himself embroiled in a desperate struggle against an overwhelming German onslaught. The city, once a bustling hub of life, had transformed into a hellscape, with crumbling buildings and fortifications marking the remnants of a once proud metropolis. As the German army unleashed its fury, Kyung-jong and his fellow Soviet defenders engaged in brutal close-quarters combat. The narrow streets and confined spaces of Kharkov became a battleground for relentless fighting, with German and Soviet soldiers battling room by room, street by street. The Soviet defenders fought with unwavering determination, utilizing anti-tank rifles and small arms fire to slow the German advance. The confined spaces proved advantageous, enabling the Soviets to inflict heavy losses on the enemy. However, the Germans possessed overwhelming air superiority. Luftflotte 4, led by Field Marshal Wolfram von Richthofen, relentlessly targeted Soviet strongholds within the city. Kyung-jong's heart sank as he realized the inevitable outcome. With the city on the brink of falling, he made the difficult decision to surrender to the Germans. The timing was crucial, as a misstep could result in execution by his Soviet captors. As the Germans gradually captured key areas of the city, the fate of Kharkov hung in the balance. When SS troops neared the city's center through Dzerzhinsky Square on March 12th, Soviet fighters became desperate, but held the line with snipers, inflicting heavy casualties as the Germans struggled to seize the heart of the city. However, more German forces poured into the city from a bridgehead at the Kharkiv River, overwhelming the Red Army defenders. The city was decimated, but by March 14th, the fighting had significantly lessened. The Panzer Corps cleared the city in the following days, and the remnants of the Soviet armies retreated, leaving Kharkov to the Germans. As the Soviets routed, Yang Kyung-jong found his opportunity to be captured yet again, this time by the German forces. In the end, the Red Army suffered over 80,000 casualties, while Hauser's Waffen SS Panzer Corps lost just over 4,000 men. Kyung-jong was taken as a prisoner of war, but this status would not last. Amid brutal daily losses, the Germans were desperate to get capable soldiers to the front line, even if it meant forcing prisoners to fight. Kyung-jong once again found himself as a provisional soldier, this time fighting alongside German forces. In an incredible turn of events, he became one of the defenders of the Atlantic Wall during the Allied landings in Normandy, France on June 6, 1944. Months later, when the Germans were being overrun during the final phases of the war, Yang Kyung-jong was captured one last time by American forces. This time, however, he was not forced to fight. Unable to understand German or English, Kyung-jong was detained in British prisons until the war was over and his true identity could be ascertained. From fighting in Manchuria for the Japanese against the Soviets, to defending Kharkiv from an overwhelming German siege, to manning the Atlantic Wall against the largest amphibious invasion in human history, Kyung-jong experienced World War II like no other man. Even though he went through terrible things, Kyung-jong settled down in Illinois after the war ended and stayed there until he passed away in 1992.